Recorded May 20th, 2024. Good afternoon, Brody.
Good afternoon, Edward. How are you?
I am well. Seems like last two men standing. There can only be one. There can only be one, man.
You got it, bud. We got it, bud. Yeah, so folks, Rod Trent is out today. He's having some regional power difficulties. Rod, we're going to need you to work on that redundant, locally generated power operation. We appreciate that. Thank you. If you can get on that, that'd be great.
Yeah. Come on, man. We've been doing this how long? You don't have super redundant solar, chicken fat, reusable grease power, wind power, or something.
Reusable grease power. That's a new one. Yeah. Yeah. Good times. Good times. What's new, Edward?
Man, oh man, it's Monday. Uneventful weekend. Weather was sort of great. Then it turned crappy. Then it turned great. Did a little work in the lab. Sort of feeling what you're feeling around the identity stuff. I've actually played in my lab with a bunch of identity stuff. Like, oh my God, there's so much here. So many things you can do. So I was playing around with some PIM groups, with some custom role stuff to be able to do that. Was playing around with some Sentinel stuff. Seemed like I hadn't touched it in a gazillion years. So I went and did some updates to some analytic rules. Um, I hadn't taught a bad mouth Meraki in a while, so I did a bunch of Meraki updates. I think I'm gonna put a new appliance in. So I'm sort of doing something funky without a load balancer of a sort. So I'm trying to get the download traffic on one circuit provider to come in through one firewall, but make the egress a different exit. You're still going to go out the same cable modem, but I think I'm going to add another circuit to the house just for redundancy. I'm used to having it, but here, this stupid subdivision I moved into had an exclusive contract with AT&T, but now that that's over, two other carriers have pulled dark fiber into the neighborhood, so I can provision another circuit for backup, right? Because this
Cool.
these little hotspots don't do it. You know, I gotta have something a little bit more substantial. Uh, Rodney. But other than that, man, played around with some 80s stuff I didn't know about, um, and 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 had some just some geek time and study a little bit on some stuff I wanted to go over. But other than that, that's it. What about you?
Cool, cool. Well, it's the long weekend here in Canada. It's Memorial Day long weekend, and I'm basically effectively off on parental leave starting next week. So I'll be doing some training and some certifications next week just to fill in some time while I wait for the baby to come. And so leading up to the weekend, I was finishing up with my current customers. So I finished off a couple of engagements with a public sector customer that I was working on for quite a while, over a year. So everything from zero trust all up across all the different pillars, strategy, framework, proof of concepts, demo environments, planning. It's very interesting. And also worked on some Azure policy, custom initiatives that align to the security control framework, security cloud framework, or security control framework, security cloud. One of those.
Yes,
Anyway,
CSI stuff.
SFC, or SCF. See, I can't even remember. I've been off work too long. And then I have an existing customer, and I handed off my work to a colleague, Ali, who was on the show recently and back in Redmond. And Ali is working with me on a data protection and governance program with this customer. So we were talking with everything from sensitivity labeling, information protection, insider risk management, loss prevention, you name it. Even the fun stuff like retention, deletion. I don't like that.
I've done some RIM.
It's not fun for me, but it's,
I've done some RIM projects, man. They once you get legal in, your project's shot. Right. Well, you can't delete that. What about non-repudiation? What about executive status when they leave? We have to have this. I'm like, oh my God, who does this? Who can actually do this, right? That's why you got to have partners who know this data governance and data protection and labeling and all that other stuff, right? I did do something interesting. I don't know how many of our listeners knew this, but I got approached by a partner for some assistance on something, and won't mention the name, but there is a undocumented limit to the amount of incidents that a single log analytics workspace can ingest for incidents inside Sentinel. There is a limit. And so the limit that's documented is 3,000 incidents, within a short time span, whether that be a day or whatever constitutes a day in the world of IT. Is it 24 hours or is it 8? Whatever. But there is a watermark that will generate an error that says you have received whatever amount of incidents inside of this, and we may not be able to further process incidents if they continue at this rate. So yeah, that limit, I knew there was a theoretical, but I also knew that there was a way to, go by, but it was not so much of the technicals, like who are you to justify that limit increase, right? But I've been doing some research before I get back. I think I found something else very interesting in the way that the LAWs are doing. But it also may be because there's some big changes coming to Sentinel too on the back end, logging, whether it be main ingestion and some other things. So uh, I'm not sure I can talk about it. Let's let Bill go through. Bill starts tomorrow, right? Microsoft Bill. Yeah, that's tomorrow.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah. So that's it. That's all
Nice.
that I did. Rod's not here, but we were talking about some prompts and a couple other things. But that's all. Hey, we have a guest that wants to come on and talk about how their product interacts with Copilot for security. And
Microsoft 365 Copilot. Yes.
I'm sorry, I said Copilot for security because my brain's on that.
Or
That's
Copilot for Microsoft 365, or however you frame it.
and they're
Yes,
just
we have our friends from Cognni who are here. Yeah, data protection and governance.
data protection and governance.
Go figure. Go figure. Let's bring him in.
Yeah.
Do some introductions. Cliff, Oliver, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, how you doing? Thanks for having us.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for coming on. I had a, it's bad to read something while you're trying to talk, and I'm looking at something that says Copilot for security, but you guys specifically want to come on and talk about your company, what you do, and how you actually interact, integrate, and use M365 Copilot,
Yeah.
right? Which is a distinct thing. Right? I forget how many Copilots we have, but not so security, but let's talk about that. So how about a little introduction of who you are and your company, what you do, and then what are you doing with M365 Copilot? My brain is forcing myself not to say security.
No worries, and thank you for that. It's great to be. I love this format of conversation. It's so nice, refreshing. They're not doing a webinar, actually just having a conversation, which is great. Brody, I have to say, you made me very jealous in your opening statements. You're having a baby, so congratulations, wonderful. And also, you've handed off all your clients to your colleague. I'm like, oh man, do I dream of doing that?
It was nice. It was nice to be able to do that. We had a lot of groundwork leading up to it, and then now it's like, okay, I'll be back in a few months, so we'll see how it goes, Cliff. But she's awesome. They're gonna crush it. But yeah, it's the first time, Cliff. It's the first time I've ever had to do that in consulting, is hand off and leave for an extended period of time. And talking with my wife, who's taking a year off, like this is the first time I've had more than 2 weeks off in a row in the last 20 years. Like it's going to be interesting. Yeah,
that's fantastic, and really, you make most of the time away. It doesn't happen that often, so yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's talk about Cognni. I'll just introduce myself, talking about the company and Oliver, and then we'll kind of get into the detail a little bit. So I head up the business development team here at Cognni. I've been here for about 5 years, and I guess if we go back just over 6 years ago, the co-founder of the company kind of decided that obviously they realized data is becoming more important in this world we live in today, and data protection. And so they kind of started to throw around some ideas, try and get into the data protection game. And after a short while, they realized that actually there are plenty of players in that market already. There's loads of tools out there. But what's actually missing is real data classification. What data needs to be protected? That's kind of where the story starts, right? What data do I have? Where is it? What's at risk and what isn't? And they couldn't find a tool that kind of answered those questions for them. So they kind of pivoted to this idea of data classification. And what they did is they created a unique AI-driven platform that automatically classifies data, and it's focusing on unstructured data. So not your social security numbers, passport numbers, credit card numbers. It's things that are financial documents, HR documents, things like that. The way I kind of talk about it, and as you'll probably realize over the next hour or so. So I'm not the technical person here. That's why I bring Oliver along. But the way I kind of talk about it is, if you think about facial recognition cameras, right? So a camera's looking at us and it'll say, well, that's Brody, that's Edward, this is Cliff. And we kind of do that for information types. We've scanned into our AI almost 1 billion documents, I think it is. And what we've done is we're able to detect, I think, over 370 information types. So is it finance? Is it legal? Is it HR? If it's HR, is it a termination letter? Is it a CV, for example, right? And it does that out of the box and so on and so forth. And when we pivoted, we kind of decided to align ourselves with Microsoft. We wanted to build something that complemented what they were doing. So our full integration is with Purview, with the security stack. And we kind of started working closely with the team in Seattle, the engineering team for Purview. We are now transactable. We're IP co-sell. We're listed in the Azure market. We're members of MISA, which is the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association. We won the Compliance Trailblazer Award, a couple of years ago now, actually. Someone else just won it last week. What can you do? And we've been working very much hand in hand with the Microsoft team, because by their own acknowledgement, they realize that they do some things fantastically well. There are some gaps here and there, and they do look for third parties to kind of try and fill those gaps and help their customers get a better overall experience, right? In particular, we mentioned Copilot, and we're going to get into it in a little bit, but what we've seen really and truly over the last 6 months is this huge explosion of interest in Copilot, right? Everyone's talking about it. Everyone wants to use it. But there are two questions that come up all the time from every partner we work with and from every customer we work with. And that is, what's the ROI on Copilot? And how can I roll this out in a safe and secure way to my organization? And so what's happening at the moment is that organizations are buying licenses in maybe the hundreds as opposed to the thousands. And they're even scaling back somewhat to those hundreds and saying, well, okay, we need to figure this out, how to do this. So now we're in a position where primarily we work mostly through partners, global partners. I don't want to mention them now, but the biggest partners that Microsoft have. And we're working on developing a rollout tool for Copilot. How can an organization roll this out, again, in a safe and secure way to their organization? And we're going to get into the details of that a little bit later on. I'm going to pause at this point because I can keep talking. I don't want to do that. I want to give Oliver a chance because, as I said before, he's a much younger and smarter one than me. So, Ollie, take it from here. Introduce yourself and where you fit in.
First off, don't believe Cliff when he says he doesn't know anything. He knows a lot more than he's letting on,
Noted.
But yeah, no. So Cliff drags me along to all his fun stuff, and basically my job is hope that we have some answers. But at the end of the day, no, I like Cliff said, it's kind of been really cool seeing co-pilots, all the various co-pilots, Edward, coming along. They have so much potential to really expedite a lot of the menial stuff that's going on today. But again, the question is, how do we hit on the proper use cases, number one, and then how do you kind of make sure that they stay within the scope of what they want to use, right? So I don't know. With that, again, that's enough of an introduction for me. I'm sure we'll keep going.
Good stuff. Yeah. So primarily the background came from data security, information protection, etc. I know that we're going to be talking about Copilot for M365 integration with your team, but I looked up some of your capabilities earlier today, and I was really interested in the integration with the Purview portal and your custom classifications. So I thought that it was really interesting because I know Microsoft's got our built-in sensitive information types, but you classify based on business unit, let's say, right, and get down to the more specifics. And I'm curious about if you want to talk about that a little bit more, because that's an interesting take on interacting with Purview I haven't seen before, and I think there's a lot of value there. So I'd just like to hear more about that in particular, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Cliff, you got anything to add before I move in?
Ollie, this is definitely your area of expertise. You know that. So he's just being polite.
Well, so as Oliver goes into his conversation about this, is there anything you would like to share? Is something visual for, or you would just like to go ahead and just talk through the process of your solution? Either one works for us. I want to hear about it, the Purview part, because I'm interested, just like Brody is, how that works.
Why don't I start explaining, and then at some point in the middle here, I'll get it up on the screen so that everyone can follow along a bit better. But
Works for me.
beautiful, beautiful. The context is essentially, if you look at something like Copilot for M365, right? Why is it such a powerful tool? It's taken all of the power of kind of the LLMs, right? Everything we've seen with, the explosion of OpenAI into ChatGPT, into, Google Bard and whatever they branded that again these days. But basically, it's training that all on your own data, right? And so it's really, really powerful because you can ask it all kinds of questions about, hey, what's happening with company X, Y, Z, right? What's happening with, meeting A, B, C? How should I prepare for this? Can you make me notes for that, right? And the really difficult part is how do you make sure that you can access everything you should with nothing you should, right? And that's been kind of one of the fundamental questions that's been facing everyone in this whole journey, right? And so, we've been working now with kind of the Purview stack for a little while. Obviously, for kind of people who are familiar, that's the compliance stack within Microsoft, right? So labeling and notifying when different information is being used, but it's taken on a new importance when people are accessing, all kinds of information. We keep talking about there's a lot of stuff lurking under the surface, and it's just coming up now, right? With the Copilot for M365 being deployed across so many organizations. And so, from our point of view, there's kind of 4 layers to proper data security, right? There's the data source layer. What are you connecting to? There's the data discovery layer. Okay, well, in which data sources, what can you actually find, right? There's the insights layer. How can you actually understand what you're looking at, right? And then finally, there's kind of the notification protection layer of what can you do with those insights, with that discovery and those data sources. And so, for us, we really view that second layer, right? Data discovery as the key to all of this, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you're connected to, doesn't matter what you can do with it, how much strength you have if you don't have the brain power in the whole thing. And that's kind of what Cognni is at the end of the day. We've tried to come in here and solve the issue of how do you identify and monitor, the tens of thousands of documents that are going through every organization each month, right? Millions for larger ones. It's a really difficult question. And so we'll come in, right? We will break down these documents, these unstructured documents, not by, hey, it's got a little serial number here, or it's got a, passport or a social security number. We actually look at all the formatting inside, indentation, tables, headers, footers, signatures. We like to talk about, it's kind of like facial recognition, right? You know what a nose, cheeks, mouth, eyes, eyebrows, whatever, right? And if you look at all those component pieces, the different profiles of each, that's how you actually end up with a strong understanding of, who a person is, or what a document is, or what an anything is, right? And that's what we try and take and bring that visibility into Purview, right? So I'll maybe pull up something now because, it's probably more fun than looking at me.
Although I like your background.
Here we go, one sec. But that's kind of where we will. One second. Tell me when you can see something.
Yeah, all good. I know it takes a minute when you're not using a platform that you're used to. Present
Yeah.
button, and then share screen again, and then in the window tab, click on what you want to share, and then click share one more time.
Okay, beautiful. Nice. Cool. You got it?
Got it.
Yes,
There
we
you go.
do.
Yeah, there you go.
Beautiful. So that whole approach, appreciate that, by the way, Brody.
I got you.
That whole approach, right, of breaking down this information, right? So the finance, the legal, the HR, the financial reporting, the employee cost, the agreements, all these different things, right? It's really hard to find out what they are without kind of involving some manually. So we'll go in and automatically, document this and create a bit of a data state of what's going through an organization. But at the end of the day, the goal is to actually automate inside of Microsoft a set of sensitivity labels, right? Because these Microsoft sensitivity labels, right? So everything that we see here, which is pulled directly from Purview and our tenant, is what will actually allow Copilot for M365 to close the circle finally, is what's going to allow that to actually respect the permissions of different users, right? The combination of site permissions in SharePoint, label permissions on the file level, right? Mailbox permissions. That's what actually allows Copilot for M365 to work as strongly as it can within the confines of, a certain location. And, if you've got Cliff here, who we all know is prone to having access to things maybe he shouldn't.
Come on, Cliff.
If I've got access, I've got access. What can I do?
Yeah. Sounds like
Well,
the
if you
data custodian's fault,
I
honestly.
just want to reiterate here, by the way, Ollie, the Microsoft sensing labels, not Cognni labels. Yeah? It's an important
For sure.
Yeah.
It's a very important distinction. I don't think anyone likes to run two parallel systems with parallel policies and parallel anything, right?
No. And I noticed that. That's why I was curious about that, because I think it's brilliant. And like when you classify something as, financial, highly confidential, is this based on your own modeling and experience in-house, or do you train the system based on the customer's specific sector needs, et cetera?
Yeah. So it's a bit of both. Like all of our categories are coming out of the box. We've got, plenty of training on basically all the data that any organization in the world is going to have, right? You've got bills of sale, right? You've got legal documents, you've got financial documents, HR documents. These are kind of standard, pieces of work that we do for everyone. But we've got, plenty of customers, some different enterprises that will come to us and say, hey, listen, I can tell you for sure you've never seen this type of document before. We said, great, give us 4 or 5, we'll train it up. We've got ourselves a new category and we can get that labeled for you. Like it's really that simple. We kind of bypass a lot of the complexity of trainable classifiers with what we're doing. And the whole idea, right, is to take this and just enhance what's going on inside of Microsoft, right? Like everything built native is great, by the way, there's nothing wrong with it. And it does a great job. What we're really trying to do is just extend the reach of all this stuff into Microsoft. And so, we at least, I think we do a pretty decent job of that.
Cool. And so you have a capability that like trainable classifiers also uses machine learning to look for pattern recognition within documents to then build a label or a distinction.
Yeah, and we're bringing out a new capacity that's basically going to allow you to kind of do that straight from the interface. And
cool.
So we're kind of excited for that to come out pretty soon.
I noticed in your presentation up to the upper right, you have Active Cognni to Microsoft legacy policies via Microsoft Information Protection MIP. Is that something that does an API call and pulls, and you need MIP deployed onto the endpoints to be able to get that to work? Is that what that is?
So it's a good catch, and I got to say I keep forgetting to remind someone to update that to now MPIP, or more appropriately Microsoft Purview Information Protection, as they keep reminding me. But but yeah, we basically we've got a nice working relationship through our good friends at Misa. Hey Maria, hey Alexia. To some of our friends that are running, the Microsoft Information Protection module, and some of the others around Purview as well. And so they've got a beautiful kind of MIP SDK that's made available to certain partners. And what we do is we'll hook into there. Again, we'll run our own classification. We will do our own processing of all this unstructured data and some structured stuff as well. And basically, we'll hook into there and push the request through the MIP SDK, make sure labels are in place, and really at the end of the day try and bring someone from point A of I'm not quite sure what's going on, right? I've got Copilot for M365 coming out. I've been told by the board that's a new mandate. We're gonna try this out. We bought 300 licenses as was the minimum a little while ago, right? We've deployed 50 of them, 100 of them. We're kind of rationing it up. But I don't really know who has what, I'm not really sure what's going on. And so, we use this as a, let's document all of the sensitive data in the environment, right? Let's figure out where it's going. Let's figure out which applications it's being used in, stored in.
And who has access to it. I saw that in one of your demos online today too, where it's not just like the content of what's in the document, but who has access to it. And you can actually paint a profile, I think, with different users and say, Cliff here. Cliff's got access to, like the 5-year plan. Cliff's got access to everybody's salaries. Cliff's over permission versus just what's in the document. Actually show the permission structure as well, which I think is cool.
Exactly. So we've got and we've just built this out actually with a couple of our partners. And I appreciate the research, Brody, by the way. That's a fairly new addition to Cognni, I'll say. But we've basically built out a scanner to go through SharePoint and say, hey, you have oversharing in these locations. This is a public site, or this is a private site, or hey, here's a user with a strong or weak affiliation to, let's say, highly sensitive financial information, right? And we use those signals to basically try and scope in. What should you do, right? What are the next steps? How can you, land some kind of secure licensing for something like a Copilot for M365, and then build it out over time, right? It's always a bit of a journey, We come across some partners and customers that we really appreciate that are super well informed, much better than we could ever hope to be, and really kind of experts in their field. We've come across people that ask us, what does compliance mean, right? And from both sides, you kind of say, listen, everyone's actually got the same needs. It's just a matter of how much education you got to do before you get to the same point, right?
So Oliver, based on your last comment, I'm going to ask 3 micro questions that make one big question. You were talking about a scanner that you have. So my introduction into this years ago when I first started working at Microsoft was the AIP scanner, right? It changed the way it went out from on-premise. You can do it from the cloud. So let me ask one question. Do you have an agent overlay of any sort, or are you just using API calls from the whatever the entitlement of the E5 SKU is, Purview, whatever it is? Is there an agent?
Yeah. So we've got kind of 2 offerings right now with a couple design partners on our on-premise offering. Obviously, that's kind of got some super light touch agent. We're doing the processing still through the Azure data centers, where we're kind of working with all the Microsoft tool sets and whatnot. But for the SharePoint stuff, it's all API calls. It's really simple stuff.
Okay. Number 2 question is, and Brody will understand this question here. One of the things that AIP was, and now MIP or MPIMP or whatever they're calling it now, Microsoft Cloud App Security or Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps is sort of like the cousin. Like, I'm seeing these things happen with the identity and the data and SaaS applications. Does your product have any CASB insights for those cloud application security brokers, CASB for everybody else, or whatever they're calling it now? Does your product have insights to be able to take telemetry and or information from activity in the customer's chosen CASB solution?
At the moment, no. And
Okay.
that's, being totally honest, we're pushing into Defender more than we're pulling out of it at the moment. That's something that we've been, again, talking with all the different product teams. Again, we sometimes just talk in circles because we love the people at Microsoft and the fun conversations. But when we actually get down to business, we're usually getting somewhere good. So right now we'll connect to a bunch of different data sources, bring in the insights, who's trusted with, for example, for Defender for Cloud Apps, right? We'll label things in Purview, and we'll help customers scope a policy that says, hey, if a file goes to an organization, right, you should get a notification. But which file, which organization, right? Mm-hmm. And so those are the questions we're trying to answer around those insights right now. Let's put a label on it. Let's scope a policy around it. And then let's say, hey, these are the trusted organizations based on what we've seen running through on Cognni, and we can add them to the policy.
That'll probably be the last time I ask that question to any partner that does that, because you're starting to see that the CASB offering, that's not one of the strong suits for it anymore. It's starting to look more at SaaS application enforcement, especially with all these touted AI applications, rather than what data, because the data protection and all of those things are now being built more into the Defender, and as well as partners like yourself. So the CASB is not as important anymore. I just thought I'd ask you one more time to sort of get validation that people aren't doing that anymore. People are like, nah, it's making a CASB too slow when you have to do that introspection. The last thing is, who does the enforcement? If you guys have an enforcement mechanism, are you relying on Purview to do the enforcement? Or if your product is sitting there as an overlay to MPIP, whatever it is these days, who does the enforcement? If you see something that says warn, block, auto label, and notify, is it your product, or is your product telling Purview hey, go do this, right? Because we've seen it, and you may not have a label for it, but we do, and you need to go do something about this.
Cliff, do you want to start off by saying your favorite 2 words?
I don't know what 2 words you mean. I am going to say something at this point. I want to point out that this is also working on the E3 license, the label automation. It works on E3, right? Which is, some people at Microsoft kind of don't like that, but they're kind of not seeing the big picture, which is this really is a driver to E5, right? The very basis of any data classification or data security is classification and labeling. And labeling seems like such an impossible task for organizations. Where do you start? If you ask your own internal business users to label stuff, maybe a day or two ain't going to happen. And even if they do, everyone understands documentation differently, right? So you're going to label things differently, whatever it might be. So getting that level of accuracy and consistency into the labeling in place enables the entire E5 stack to become real, to become useful, right? There's a lot of guys that have got E5 and that card's struggling with how to use it. I mean, people are thinking about going from E3 to E5. It's a significant layout of cache, right? So they're kind of umming and ahhing. But if you have this in place and you can see what needs to be done very clearly because you understand where your information is, who has access, and what it actually is, it enables that conversation to become a lot quicker and accelerates the adoption to E5. And which is a really important point. And certainly Microsoft, I guess, salespeople always ask that question. Well, hang on, if they can do that on E3, right? But the truth is, it's all about getting to the E5. That's definitely the goal of Microsoft, and that's what we're trying to help facilitate. And that's why Microsoft themselves bring us into a number of conversations with their clients who are, let's say, dithering as to whether to go with full E5 or not.
Yeah.
By the way, Cliff, the answer to your question was better together. Those are your 2 favorite words.
Better together. That seems to be the answer to it. But that's interesting that if you had to ask somebody at Microsoft, the North Star is always E5. Well, you didn't do anything with E5. The fact that you said, hey, if you have E3, I like a realistic approach because this is what the customer has. Their requirements it doesn't get any less because they can't get the E5 SKU. But you're right, it is a lead-in because you always have that conversation. Well, wow, how can I get this thing that you were talking about? Well, I didn't sell you this, but I'm telling you, you have to go to Microsoft to get this to enable this particular feature or capability in our product. It has nothing to do with us, right? You can't call an API endpoint if it doesn't exist. Exactly. You know, and it doesn't exist because you're not enabled or skewed for it. So I get that.
For sure. And also, I mean, what we're trying to do is kind of make Microsoft the single go-to product, if you like, for everything, for all cybersecurity, right? There are so many tools out there today, right? And CISOs are like, the number one problem is, what tool do I use, right? Because what's best, wasn't best? The guy that was here last told me this, the company already paying for this. They're trying to get kind of like consolidate into what they're doing, which is why the better together story is so important here, is that it does fit in very nicely with Microsoft. You don't need anything else. It just feeds all that classification automatically into the Purview stack. So yeah, that's kind of where we are.
Cool. Yeah. I want to dig into something you mentioned earlier about how you're preparing organizations for the adoption of Copilot with the adoption of your solution. Can you get into the specifics on how you're ensuring that AI broadly, right? Whether it's Microsoft applications, whether it's third-party applications, we're ensuring that these applications and services don't have access or have permissive access to a large swath of data without having checks and balances in place.
Sure. I mean, Ollie, you'll kind of permission scan and so on and so forth in a second. But everything we've done the last 6 months development-wise, we spoke at Defender for Cloud before, and it's coming. A lot of it was pushed off because of this immediate need for this Copilot rollout. Our partners, the Accentures of the world, people like that, are coming to us and saying, we're struggling with getting our customers, to adopt a Copilot here. And we need, their biggest problem is doing it in a safe way. And so what we've developed, and what Ollie will kind of walk you through in a second, is really based on direct feedback from our customers and the requirements from our partners, right? I think this is going into general availability, I think, next week or something. But yeah, go for it, Ollie. Just talk through the permission scanner, because it's kind of like eye-opening, as it were.
Yeah, no, I mean it's as we were saying before, right? Like Copilot for M365 is a hugely powerful tool that relies on the proper checks and balances. So from our perspective, there's a million things that our partners want to do with customers to help accelerate that adoption, right? Things like, inventorying the privacy levels of SharePoint sites, right? Making sure that there's not kind of crazy permissions there, right? Maybe changing the site from public to private when necessary, right? Finding site owners and notifying them to review permissions, identifying sensitive content, applying sensitivity labels. There's a whole swath of these, that we've been talking kind of very extensive with all our partners on, because this is what customers need to do to get from A to B, right? Is kind of make sure sites have the proper permissions, make sure files that are, rogue and a little bit, disparate or all over the place are actually with the proper labels. And so, we run in 3 really simple steps, kind of our assessment and protection program, right? Number 1, we're going to scan all of your SharePoint sites and we're going to say, hey, which ones are public, which ones are private, which ones are exposed to more than X number of users. That's all configurable. More than 300 users, 500 users. It's a little different when you're 70 people and 5,000 people and 10 million people, right? But so we'll create those buckets of sites and we'll say, hey, in all your public sites, let's do a scan. You've got 55 public sites in your organization. Let's scan and let's look for all that unstructured data that you're going to have a lot of trouble cataloging, right? And like Cliff mentioned before, we kind of do that on the earlier SKU of Microsoft licenses, because the fact is, not everyone is at or ready or willing to kind of move up just yet. And so the best thing we can do is kind of get people prepared and seeing utility and making sure that they're able to kind of pull value out of what they're paying for today and build business cases for why they might need a bit more in the future. So we'll catalog the site permissions. We will scan for all those files in those sites. And then we'll say, hey, you had 55 public sites. Inside of that, there were, 23 of them had accident reports or discipline documents in them. And there were 2,753 files, right, that were in those categories. Right? Would you like to apply a Microsoft Purview label? Okay, that's a pretty simple, straightforward solution. But the whole idea is, whether it's pulling a report and saying, hey, review this list of sites, whether it's automatically applying those labels, how do you go from not being able to see anything inside of your sites to visibility to protection, right? That's the 2 leaps that every organization has to make. And, there's increments along the way, but that's really how we're approaching it. And so far, I mean, again, early days as with everyone, but, we're seeing some good feedback on that. So
yeah. I think at the moment, it's very much a stage of kicking the tires with Copilot. I think it's educating people also. I think the CISO of Software One, which is one of our big partners, they actually use Cognni internally. You said Copilot's really only as good as the people that are asking the questions or the questions being asked, right? And it's really true. And so people need to go through this kind of education to understand how they're going to get Copilot to work best for them. I think there'll be a massive upturn in Copilot towards the end of this year. I think Microsoft have a target of 13 million licenses by the end of the FY24. I don't know how they're doing with that. But I think that towards the end of 24, beginning 25, you'll really start to see organizations adopting it across their organization completely, because there's so much potential there, right? There's a lot of time-saving efficiency capabilities that people aren't really aware of. Right now, they're looking into can you give me a summary of a meeting or prioritize my emails? But it's so much more than that. And it's just a matter of time in education. And they'll get there. And I think Microsoft are doing a good job in pushing out that education. But it's going to take time to kind of filter through to everyone. They'll get there. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Let's pause for a minute. We have a couple of our listeners who have questions. 2 questions from the same person. Would this also work with the equivalent of education, meaning a license, an A3?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. A1, F1, A3, F3, and all the good stuff.
And for our listeners who are not familiar with the alphanumeric designators, E is enterprise. A generally designates education, whether it be kiddies or college, and G is Gov. So let me go to a G license. We'll support G licenses, which is agency and government. Maybe
We do, but depending, there's always some sneaky stuff involved in terms of the environments they're hosted on, right?
Yeah, I stay away from it. And that's no secret that everything that's going to government lags 12 to 18 months in Microsoft before you get to it. Second part of the question is, he asked if I wanted to talk to a partner of your company, who do I speak to about finding a partner? I think that's what he's trying to get. For a partner who wants to get in touch with Oliver or Cliff, can I ask this who to speak to? I guess they just want to find you. I don't know. Put some
Find me.
clarification in there. Yeah.
It's very easy. Cliff@cognni.ai. Send me an email, and we'll take it from there. Easiest way.
All right. I got another question for you here. I didn't do as much research as Brody did today, but I threw your name out there. Some of my peers. Two interesting things came back about you guys. One of my peers that does it, he said, excellent for M&As. We use it for all our M&As, mergers and acquisitions, see what's coming in before we go. Because when they buy a company, they have no idea what the other company does.
Right.
So they use it for M&A, which is really cool. All right. Do you guys sort of map to any of the frameworks as part of like your modules like NIST or, Zero Trust is just an initiative, and or any of the regulatory bodies like PCI, GDPR? Can you just have a GDPR module and say, hey, this is what we're going to go at right now, a HIPAA high trust?
That's such a great question. You have no idea how important it is you ask that question. Let me tell you. Oliver, go for it. Explain.
I'll say we just did actually a big kind of reorganization of how we're presenting the insights inside our product. Why? Because of two things, right? The new NIST and DORA regulations that are kind of coming in, right? And the need to build those modules and say, listen, it's all well and good to show me everything, but the Digital Operational Resiliency Act, right? DORA coming in through the EU at the end of the year, right? Basically says, where's your financial information? All of it, not just the structured stuff, unstructured stuff. Tell me where it is. Tell me where it's going. Tell me how it's protected, right? So NIST2, DORA, some of the GDPR stuff, we're looking actually right now at when we're going to deploy these models and say, listen, here's your, connect to Cognni, take 2 weeks on the platform. Here's a snapshot, a little bit of what's going on with NIST2, what's going on with DORA, right? Get a little secure score and say, do I need to send educational notifications? Do I need to label information? Do I need to just pull some reports and say, hey, it's all good, but let's just make sure we've got this in the history books, right? So we've got a bunch of those coming, and then obviously the Copilot stuff. I don't need to harp on that again, but it's all in the same bracket. Yeah.
Well, I'll just say that a decent number of our customers are driven by the requirements from the finance department or the legal department, HR department, and they're very focused on specific types of regulation compliance, like DORA, for example. We have the ability within our platform just to focus on one particular information type and give access to one person with one information type. So you can keep it very limited to what people are seeing. But people say, well, who are the people you're selling to? Who's buying it? And it does range across different types, but more often than not, it comes from someone in HR or finance or legal that says, I need to get a grip on what's going on in my department because my head's on the block here, and they've got no way of doing it themselves. You can't do it manually, right? There's too much these days. So
well, you can, but you have a 24/7, 365 job with no life and a massive team that had no value. Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times we've spoken to companies that said, you know what, we're going to bring in a team of students and we'll try and do it. 2 weeks later, they're like, okay, that didn't work. It just doesn't work. It can't work, right? Scale, concentration, whatever it might be, it's not going to work. So
I remember, Cliff, you built out that ROI document a little while back about, what does it do manually versus automatically, right? And we took, if you just take minimum wage workers, right? Just people on the lowest possible pay scale and say, hey, go through all this manually, it still is, 2.5 times the cost minimum to automate stuff or to classify stuff manually than automatically, right? Like It's a no-brainer at this point. So someone's buying some tool to take that off their plate because come on.
Yeah. And the data sprawl is just, it's intense. Edward brought up third-party SaaS applications. It's important that we understand where all of our data lies within those apps, on our on-prem data. You can use the MIP information protection scanner to do that. And then your just standard Microsoft 365 tenant or other public clouds like Google and Amazon. Like, I don't know how one person or a team of humans can manage that. That is just an impossible task.
Yeah, and it's I don't know how AI does it. You made an interesting note here, Cliff. You were saying that Microsoft's ambitious about getting some double-digit million in that. I don't think that's out of the park. I think that the industry that you're working in right now with the particular Copilot solution gives you guys a distinct advantage because it is easier to understand SKU versus SCU. Because you're buying a SKU for M365 and you know exactly what you're getting. I got 13,000 people. I need 13,000 licenses of M365, Copilot. But when you're looking at Copilot for security, you're talking about a consumption model based on compute and this and how long something takes. Yeah, how about that? This right here is pretty straightforward, right? And then you know exactly who's using it by who's enabled for it. I can go inside the licensing and see it's applied to this person rather than creating role groups for those who have access to be able to burn this stuff. So I think you're in a very, very good market right now because it doesn't take much to adopt this. People can understand I need to go buy these licenses as an add-on to be able to do your product. And that's easy, right? So good market to be in.
Listen, a few years ago, I would never have thought in a million years the data classification labeling would excite me. I really didn't.
Same.
You know, I thought I'm not that type of guy. But the truth is, it's an unbelievably dynamic market at the moment. There's so much going on with data from so many different aspects: compliance, security, whatever it might be. That everyone's kind of struggling with it because there's so much noise about it. There's so many tools. There's so much kind of information to take in, and it's difficult. And so we're trying to kind of just simplify. You know, one of the biggest questions we always face, like, where do we even start with this? How do we start this journey towards DLP? Because everyone wants to go to DLP. How do we start the journey? And we kind of say, well, let's just on board. Let's just have a look. Let's start to understand, and then we'll get to step number 2. But step number 1 is just understand visibility. What's going on in your environment? That's kind of where we start. And it's simple. It's a SaaS solution. 2 minutes to log in and you're good to go sort of thing. So that's what we're trying to do. It's all about the customer and making their journey so much easier to kind of understand and explain and get the buy-in internally as well, because that's key for everyone, right? And that's what we're trying to do.
I know that the market is viable and robust because Brody stays busy all the time. He's working, right? And go back to that question that I asked earlier, anything about the CASB. Let me give you some context why I brought that up today. I noticed that I started getting advertisements to put Copilot on my mobile and to put these AI tools on my mobile device. Imagine that nightmare. That's the reason I asked that. I'm like, how are you going to do this? Now you can put Copilot on your mobile device. And they're advertising, scan this to download it to your phone. Okay, so somebody has to see this, right? So that's the reason I went to the CASB, the CASB question. I'll ask it, and if there's not something that you guys are doing, does it make a difference to you whether they're doing it from a traditional endpoint or any endpoint's the endpoint? Whether I'm doing it from a thing I can hold in my hand or there's something I got to sit down to? Which your guys' product doesn't matter.
No, that's one of the beautiful things about the big transition to M365, right, in the last few years is, wherever you go, whatever you're doing, it's kind of all through the same productivity tools, right? You access OneDrive through your phone, through your computer, through your tablet, through your whatever, like it is actually unified. And so, we've obviously had our lives made a lot easier by that, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone's complaining that it's all been basically consolidated, right? So
And so what your product using Copilot to enhance the already looks like vulnerable capability, do you find yourself recommending it, or do you stay very agnostic to say, hey, we work better with this? I know you say better together. You're not turning into sellers of the thing that makes your product better, right? If a customer goes, do you consult on it? Do you say, if a customer comes to you and say, hey, we're thinking about using this Copilot thing, what do you guys think? Is it like, hey, we're going to work regardless, but if we can maybe work better if you have it? Or do you try to stay out of that?
It's hard to stay out of it. I mean, everyone's asking questions about it now, right? You can't avoid it. If you're anything in data, and it's the number one topic, right? It's top of mind for everyone. So you kind of give your opinion. We kind of say we're not experts on the Copilot piece, and we're part of the Microsoft private preview for security and so on and so forth. But we pass it on to our partners or Microsoft people that are relevant. We talk about it because we can't claim ignorance. We're very deep inside it. So people like opinions. They like to learn, right? As I said before, education is really important with regards to Copilot at the moment. They don't necessarily love hearing everything just from Microsoft. They like to hear from others as well, right? They want to get different opinions. Like, what do you guys think of it, and so on and so forth. And so we're in a fairly good position to give some sound advice, but we kind of try not to get too much into the detail.
I agree. That's just mainly my buddy said about you guys. You're good consultants. You're good consultants. I won't say too much. It'll give away what company's at. But you guys are pretty good consultants. So I was like, all right, pretty good. And so
I got one. Oh, you got one?
No. Okay, I was looking out at my notes.
What's upcoming? What are some like features, capabilities that are upcoming on the Cognni platform that we can look forward to that you're allowed to talk about?
Oh, there's plenty of fun stuff. But what
we're allowed to talk about, Oliver.
Exactly. I gotta think about that one for a second.
Yeah.
I like to talk about everything, but no, we're like a lot of people. We've been extending. You know, if you think back to those kind of 4 layers of connectors, discovery, insights, protection, right? We've been focusing on the 2 base layers, basically, right? You know, we've been sitting on that discovery layer for a long time, making sure that we provide the best unstructured data discovery in the world, right? Across many languages, so that's where we've been sitting for a long time, because, you know, on top of that, you build insights. On top of that, you build protection, and you can target everything exactly as you want, right? What we've been doing recently, though, is building out across data sources, you know, things like MS SQL, AWS S3. We've built, you know, a custom audit log for, you know, exported information from MS Dynamics, right?
Nice.
We've got some interesting stuff around, you know, obviously our on-premise product and how we'll be doing some labeling on legacy data there, right? So there's plenty of fun stuff coming out there. And at the same time, we're building out a lot of the capabilities around our labeling to extend it just from, you know, file labeling to, you know, have certain users and groups enabled, disabled, locations, and just kind of, you know, enhancing all the logic around that, right? Because, you know, we've got some other stuff, obviously, but at the end of the day, you know, my favorite things anyway are, how do we connect to some data source? How do we find all the data? How do we make sure that, you know, tools like Purview can basically benefit from what Cognni is doing in terms of discovery, right? You know, you've got all the brawn in the world, right? You know, just a bit of extra brain never hurt anyone. So,
and Oliver, you mentioned before also on-prem, which is also going to be released as well. And I'm going to say, being very vague on purpose, a much deeper integration with Purview as well. There's a lot of stuff that we've got planned in the next 3 months and beyond that. It's going to kind of really enhance that better together story, if you like.
Yeah. Nice. Is there an upcoming announcement or event that we should make folks aware of?
I mean, the permission scanners, like, that's going to be really significant for our customers and our partners. It's going to be game changing, I would say. Again, it's coming directly from the requirements of our customers and from our partners in terms of Copilot. It's going to make the rollout a lot easier for people and a lot safer. And I think it's going to really kind of fly off the shelf, as it were.
To put Cliff's answer another way, we're still recovering from RSA, so we've got a couple of weeks of quiet, and then we'll kind of regroup and figure out who's going where when. But we had a lot of fun, you know, presenting with Microsoft at the booth and meeting all the partners that we unfortunately see about 3 or 4 times a year. So
copy that. Awesome. That's all my questions. Ever you got anything else?
Dude, you're on mute.
I can't afford the fancy things like Brody, right? I have to do it manually, right? No, this has been very informative. I'll admit that the whole discipline that Brody works in can be intimidating. It is a lot of work, right? And this is not something that is necessarily binary. The way I work in threat intelligence and forensics and stuff like that, it is always moving, right? Because data is always morphing and changing, and you have to be able to be dynamic and know what you're working against, what you're working with, and who you're working with, right? To be able to do these things, right? So if you don't skill your customers up, they're never going to get better. And like I said, if you're teaching these things, they should get better with this, and it should make your product better, rather than, I think your product is one of the better products out there to show bad habits. These are bad habits. Stop doing this, okay?
I'll tell you a funny story, Ed, just to butt in for a second. Is whenever the way we work is we onboard a client and then we bring them back a week later and they open up their platform of Cognni, and they always want to see highlight a couple of things. So we've got this forensics page where you can search by name and you can find all the risks that person's responsible for. And so everyone says, "Oh, do me," and then this whole list comes down, like, "Oh shit," and they move on and they're like, "Let's look at the CEO." And the CEO is always the worst culprit. He has everything exposed to everyone. The board, always. It's unbelievable, and it happens every single time. So yeah, it's a big problem, and you're right. There's a lot of, I think, Ann Johnson she spoke a couple of years ago. She wrote this great blog about. Yeah, she wrote this blog about digital empathy. So I'm trying to understand how people are working. It was just after COVID, people working at home, people making mistakes, genuine mistakes about how to share information, so on and so forth, and people getting caught up in trouble. And she said we have to understand that people have certain capabilities, they get used to certain things, they make mistakes. And part of, we talk about Cognni as an education tool as well. It's not just like capture, it's like, let's try and teach people what they're doing wrong in a nice way. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So you can think, why is Brody sending all this stuff to his Gmail account? Because Brody wants to work at home. So, just things like that. But you think that just goes against everything we believe in as a security part of the organization.
Right, Cliff. Well, you bring up a good point. Well, then how do we enable our teams to work effectively at home? Right, to your point, because if people are going around the controls, there's obviously the miss here. There's a gap between what people need to do from a productivity standpoint and the business and security. We got to find a blend. So that's a good point.
And I think it starts with leadership too, because this is just a perspective for me, and you guys work in this way more than I do. I'm on the other side of the way bad guys do stuff. Whereas in your realm, the end user is the bad guy most of the time by ignorance. They're not doing it malicious. Well, they can. That's by insider risk. But one thing I have not noticed, if you look at almost all of the C-suites, very rarely do I see, I'm sorry if my mic, it sounds like ants are crawling through it or something. Very rarely do you see a deputy CIO. You'll see a deputy CISO. Yeah. I've seen even CTOs, but very rarely. And so now this thing has sort of been offloaded to different executive sponsored roles, your data protection officer, your DPO, and things along those lines. And so if you have CISOs who are still trying to be the person in charge rather than, if they're still trying to be the person responsible rather than the person accountable, that's a recipe for failure. Someone else should be responsible for it, but you're accountable if you think it's going to happen. And I don't know why you don't see a lot more deputy CIOs, because they're overwhelmed. And then you see them report up to somewhere like the CFO, which clouds their judgment about how they go about their business. Because CFO is like, it's just going to cost me more money. Why? And then you find it down the line, whereas, the CISO is a little bit, gated, because he goes, I can keep the bad guys out. So if the bad guys come to work every day and check in at 9 o'clock, I don't know what to tell you. And so
I think
you see it, but it is something that needs to be definitely addressed. Data is not getting smaller. There's more data. This 1 hour call, I think some big brain article said we generated another 5% of global data that can never go away. Right. And it's crazy. So hey, this has been great.
Likewise, guys. Thank you so much. By the way, Brody, at the beginning of when you mentioned the handoff, I'd love to speak to the person handing off. You mentioned information protection, the DLP, etc., etc. It sounds like Cognni have a good place there. And just for any customers out there, by the way, if you are interested in Cognni, would like, the way we typically work is we'll onboard a client and we give them like 2 weeks, a month free trial of the platform, right? No commitment, no nothing. So by all means, reach out. We can set it up very quickly and just take a look, see what there is in your environment, and then worry about it.
And I tell everybody, they're great consultants and advisors. They know how to get you. All right. I get it. I want to buy it. I don't even need it. Can I buy some? I don't even want it. Well, Oliver and Cliff, thank you so much for coming on to the show. This is not a topic we generally, talk about, data classification, things on that line, even though we have one of the best on the show in Brody. It's because it's hard. So that and compliance is hard. Me to talk about Sentinel and threat detection forensics, right?
Yeah.
Get a bunch of us in the room like you figure it out, right? But this is good because you have to deal with people all the time. And the bigger organizations are the ones their risk to them is that they keep growing. And you can't, there's no way you're going to mitigate that risk, right? You gotta hold serve if you're playing tennis, or you got to defend the end zone if you're playing football. There's no way around it, right? You got to play hard, make them punt, make the bad guys punt and go the other way. So, or make a volley that they can't get to. But everyone, thanks so much for tuning into the show. Thanks to our outstanding guests, Oliver and Cliff, for coming on. We'll get any of the information from them. We'll put it in the show notes. We'll put it across all of our medias, our social outlets and everything. And this is a really good show. Super, super interesting. Got some good questions from, I think that's Trevor, Trip 8472. Just watch the show, Trev. We'll be able to get the information out to you so you can reach out to them directly if they want you to talk to them.
Yes, we do.
And we'll go there, right? So next Monday, we are off for the American Memorial Holiday Week. I think, Brody, you guys are doing it now as a Victoria's Day. Is that what it is?
That's today.
Today. Okay. So no show next week, but we will be back June 3rd, and we have a surprise for our listeners and our supporters. So have a good one.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
I got it.
They actually do.